Clara Bennett froze in the doorway, her breath catching as her eyes landed on an unfamiliar sight. A pair of women's boots sat neatly in the entryway. Boots that weren't hers. For a moment, her mind refused to accept what she saw. Maybe it was a guest, a friend of Richard's sister, but deep in her chest, a cold, heavy ache began to spread. Faint sounds drifted from the bedroom, cutting through her thoughts. They weren't casual conversation. They were unmistakable, intimate, leaving no room for doubt. Her legs felt like lead as she forced herself down the narrow hall of their Boston apartment, each step making her heart pound harder. Finally, her hand gripped the bedroom door frame. She pushed it open. There was no mistake. Richard Hale, the man she had trusted, the man she had believed in for years, was in their bed with a red-haired woman. The scene could have been lifted from a cheap TV drama, yet here it was, happening in her home, in her life. A lump rose in her throat so fast she thought she would choke. Tears stung her eyes, but she fought them back. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She turned, slammed the door so hard the walls trembled, and bolted out of the apartment. The icy winter air hit her as she stumbled down the steps and onto the street. Her breath came in ragged gasps, forming clouds in the frigid night. She pressed her scarf to her face, trying to hold in the sobs. It didn't work. How could he? The words tore out, raw and hoarse. A passerby turned, assuming she spoke to him. But Clara was already hurrying away, her boots crunching in the snow. That apartment, her home, was no longer hers. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The snow whipped across her face, carried by a biting wind. The streets were nearly empty, the storm turning the city into a desolate maze. Her eyes burned, chest aching with each breath. In the distance, a glowing cafe sign offered a small refuge. She pushed through the door, the bell chiming weakly overhead. Warmth enveloped her, making her shiver all the more. But panic set in as she fumbled for her bag. She had left it at the apartment, wallet, money, everything. Frantically, she searched her coat pockets. A few coins clinked together, barely enough for the cheapest item. She handed them to the barista, who offered a sympathetic glance and placed a steaming paper cup in front of her. Clara wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat seep into her frozen skin. She sat in the far corner, staring at the dark swirl of coffee as if it could give her answers. No money. No man, no anchor. For years, she had poured herself into their shared life, supporting Richard, helping with the publishing business, building a future she believed in. And in minutes, it had all been destroyed. The cafe lights dimmed slightly as closing time neared. The barista began wiping tables, stacking chairs. Clara pulled her scarf tighter and stepped back into the snow. Returning home was unthinkable. Facing Richard, or that woman, was unbearable. Her gloved hand brushed against the ring of keys in her pocket. Among them was the key to her office at the publishing house. She had spent countless late nights there, sometimes even sleeping on the couch during deadlines. It wasn't home, but it was safe. The decision came instantly. Clara pulled her coat tighter and headed toward the office, snow crunching under her boots. Her mind raced with fragments of memory and unanswered questions. When had it started? How many times had he lied while sneaking off with someone else? And why hadn't she seen it? The city loomed silent around her. Shuttered storefronts, snow-blanketed sidewalks, a lone taxi passing with headlights blurring in the storm. Step by step, heavy and uneven, she moved forward. By the time her office building came into view, her hair was damp with melted snow, her body trembling with exhaustion. The guard at the front desk looked up in surprise. "Ms. Bennett," he said gently. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Clara forced a thin, unsteady smile. I need to stay the night in my office, if that's all right." The old guard hesitated only a moment before nodding. He had known her for years, witnessed her dedication, her kindness. "Of course," he said softly. "I'll put on a pot of tea. You look frozen." Gratitude swelled in her chest. She whispered a quiet thank you and headed upstairs. Inside her office, she collapsed into the chair, clutching the warmth of the moment, if not the life she had lost. Clara held the warm mug the guard had given her a few minutes earlier. The office smelled faintly of books and ink, familiar, steady. But her heart was anything but steady. Tears she had fought so hard to hold back finally spilled, burning her cheeks as she pressed her hands to her face. Her sobs filled the empty office. She had thought she knew the man she lived with, the life they shared. She had believed she was building a family, even without a wedding ring. Tonight all of that was gone. She was alone in a storm, and though she had found temporary shelter, the world she had built had vanished. The next morning, Clara barely slept on the warm couch. Her eyes were swollen, her mind restless, haunted by images she couldn't erase. She thought she had hit the bottom of despair, but the day had more in store. Footsteps startled her. She sat up quickly, brushing her face as the office door swung open. Richard Hale stood there, immaculately dressed, as if nothing had happened. His dark coat was free of snow, his expression disturbingly calm. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, her voice sharp and weary. Richard shrugged, his tone almost casual. "I came to check on you. You ran out last night. Thought you might do something dramatic." Clara rose, anger barely contained. "You were with her in our bed, Richard. And you think I'm being dramatic?" He didn't flinch. Leaning against the doorway, he spoke with an air of superiority. "Don't twist this. Affairs happen. It's not the end of the world. Maybe if you'd been more attentive, more exciting, maybe I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Her breath caught, outrage mixing with pain. "Don't you dare blame me for your betrayal." Richard's eyes hardened. "You've always been too emotional, too fragile. Do you know how exhausting it is to deal with someone like that every day? I deserve better. Someone who makes me feel alive." Clara's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream, to strike him, but shock had drained her strength. "You've destroyed everything we built. You've destroyed me." He stepped closer, voice low and venomous. "Don't be melodramatic. You'll survive. You always do. But don't think you can take what's mine. The apartment, the business contacts, the life we had, that's mine. You're nothing without me." Her body stiffened. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone cruel and unrecognizable. She gathered her bag from the desk, deliberate in her movements. "I don't want your things, Richard. Keep them. All I want is my dignity." As she moved toward the door, his hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force. His face hovered inches from hers, his voice a dangerous whisper. "Don't think you can walk away so easily. You owe me. Don't forget who kept you afloat all these years." Clara struggled against his hold, fear clawing at her chest. "Let me go," she hissed. Footsteps echoed in the hall. A secretary appeared, eyes wide. "Mr. Hale, the managing director is waiting in your office." For a split second, Richard's grip tightened, his jaw clenched. Then he released her abruptly, straightened his suit as if nothing happened, and cast Clara a final glare. "You're lucky," he muttered before striding past the secretary. Clara stood trembling, rubbing her sore arm. She shook her head at the secretary and hurried down the hall. She couldn't bear another second in that building. Outside, the winter air cut against her cheeks. She walked aimlessly, boots crunching through the snow, breath uneven. She had nowhere to go, no home, no safe haven, only the cold streets of Boston stretching before her. Her thoughts drifted to the past. She had been alone before. She knew what it was to lose everything. When she was a child, her parents had died in a car accident, leaving her in the care of her grandmother. Fragile in appearance but strong in spirit, her grandmother had raised her with warmth and discipline. For years, it had been just the two of them against the world. When her grandmother passed, Clara thought she had lost the last anchor in her life, until Richard came along. He had seemed steady, charming, ambitious. He had made her believe in security again. She had poured her heart into him, into their shared work, convinced she had finally found her place. Now that illusion lay shattered. She was that lonely girl again, wandering through the cold with no one to turn to. The memory of her grandmother's voice echoed faintly. "Life will test you, Clara, but you must not break. You come from strong roots, remember that." Her eyes stung, but she held back the tears this time. She had cried enough. The snow fell heavier, blanketing the streets, muffling the sounds of the city. Clara pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. She didn't know where her path would lead, but she would keep moving forward. But one thing was certain. She could not go back. Clara stood before the heavy front door of the apartment she had once called home. Snow swirled around her, clinging to her coat and lashes. Yet, it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. She slid her key into the lock, twisted it, and stopped. The key jammed, refusing to turn. She tried again, harder this time, her breath forming frosty clouds. Nothing. A sick realization hit her. Richard had changed the locks. Her chest tightened as she pressed her forehead to the wood, fighting the urge to collapse right there on the landing. The place she had shared with him, decorated with her books and photographs, was no longer hers. She was locked out of her own life, biting her lip until she tasted blood. She turned away. The snow muffled her footsteps as she descended the stairs and stepped back onto the street. Where could she go? The office came to mind. At least there she had history, familiarity, a desk still bearing her name. When she arrived, the receptionist's eyes flickered with discomfort. Clara forced a small smile, heart pounding. "I'm here to pick up some files," she said, adjusting her scarf. Before she could move further, a voice cut through the air. "You don't belong here anymore." Richard's tone was sharp, commanding. He had followed her, or perhaps anticipated her, standing tall in the lobby. He looked every bit the man in control. "You were dismissed yesterday. Security has orders. You can't just walk in as if nothing happened." The receptionist's eyes darted nervously between them. Clara swallowed hard. "Dismissed. You can't just erase me from this place. I've given years of my life." Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You gave me years, Clara. That's what this was. My company, my success, my name. You were along for the ride. Don't fool yourself into thinking you mattered here without me." Her breath caught. "This was our work. I helped build it with you. Don't rewrite history," he smirked, waving casually at a passing colleague. "Enjoy your afternoon." Then back to Clara, his words dropped like shards of ice. "If you make trouble, I'll make sure every door in this city shuts in your face. No job, no reputation, nothing." Tears threatened, but she forced them back. To cry in front of him would be another victory for Richard. "I don't want your empire," she whispered. "But you won't break me." Richard's expression darkened. But before he could reply, 2 security officers approached. Polite but firm. "Ms. Bennett, you'll need to leave now." Clara looked at the familiar halls, the offices where she had laughed with coworkers, stayed late through deadlines, celebrated small victories. Each memory felt like a blade twisting deeper. With a final glance at Richard, she straightened her shoulders. "Fine," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "I'm leaving." She walked out into the gray afternoon, heart pounding. The city seemed colder now, harsher, as if it, too, had turned against her. She was jobless, homeless, cast out, not just by the man she had trusted, but by the life they had built together. For a moment, she considered her options. There weren't many. Her savings were in joint accounts under Richard's control. Friends in Boston were few. Most of her world had revolved around him. Then a memory surfaced. Her grandmother's house in the countryside. A modest home, empty since her passing, miles away in a quiet town on the edge of New Hampshire. She hadn't been back in years, but it was still hers. The thought brought pain and relief. Pain because it reminded her of what she had lost. Relief because at least there was somewhere to go. Pulling her coat tighter, Clara walked with new determination. The streets of Boston blurred as she pictured the little white house with peeling shutters and a creaky porch. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. A place that belonged to her, untouched by Richard's reach. As she headed toward the train station, the weight of her situation pressed down heavily. Everything familiar had been stripped away in days. Yet beneath the grief, a spark of defiance flickered. Richard might have taken her job, her home, her stability, but he hadn't taken her will to survive. Clara's boots crunched against the icy pavement. Each step forward a quiet declaration. She would not be defeated. Step by step, Clara moved forward. The storm hadn't let up, and neither would she. Her suitcase dragged along the icy pavement, wheels catching in the snow. The train station wasn't far, but her body ached with exhaustion. She had barely eaten, barely slept, and the weight of betrayal pressed on her chest like a stone. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the man stepping out of the glass doors of a downtown office building until they collided. The impact jolted her backward, and she would have fallen if not for his quick reflexes. A strong hand caught her arm, steadying her. "I'm sorry," Clara murmured automatically, eyes still downcast. "No, that was my fault." His voice was calm, assured, the voice of someone used to being in control. Clara looked up. A man in his mid-30s, sharply dressed in a tailored wool coat, studied her. Dark hair neatly combed, eyes that seemed to weigh and measure everything. For a moment, time shifted. When their hands touched briefly, a vision rushed into Clara's mind. She saw him behind the wheel of a sleek black car, headlights slicing through the snow. The car skidded across the icy road, metal twisted, glass shattered. The vision ended as abruptly as it came, leaving her pale and shaken. She jerked her hand back, heart hammering. "Are you all right?" he asked. Clara swallowed, voice trembling. "You shouldn't drive tonight, please. I don't know how to explain it, but I had a feeling something bad will happen if you do." He studied her, expression caught between curiosity and skepticism. "You don't even know me, and you're telling me not to drive?" Her cheeks burned, but the urgency in her chest would not be ignored. "I know it sounds strange, but please, don't get behind the wheel. Trust me," the man exhaled, unconvinced. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't live my life by premonitions from strangers," he said politely, dismissively. "Take care of yourself." With that, he nodded and walked toward a black sedan waiting at the curb. Clara stood frozen, the vision replaying in her mind like a warning siren. The man slid into the back seat, but instead of driving off, he pulled out his phone. "Andrew, I won't be able to drive tonight." His voice carried faintly across the snowy street. "Take the car if you need it. I'll get another ride." A chill spread down Clara's spine. An hour later, she sat huddled on a bench at the train station when the news blared from the television. Breaking. A fatal accident occurred on I-93 this evening. A black luxury sedan lost control on the icy road. The driver was killed instantly. Her coffee cup slipped from her hands, hot liquid splashing the floor. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but shock. The image in her mind had been real. The stranger she had warned would have been behind the wheel, yet someone else was dead. Footage showed the mangled car, twisted metal glittering with shards of ice. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Around her, passengers murmured in horror, but she couldn't hear them. Her mind clung to the man's face, his skeptical gaze, the weight of his hand studying her. Who was he? Why had fate let her see this? Across the city, Jonathan Mercer sat in an upscale restaurant, phone buzzing with the news. His friend Andrew was gone, the car Jonathan himself had been supposed to drive. Pale and shaken, he remembered the woman he had collided with hours earlier. Her urgent voice echoed, "Don't drive tonight. Something bad will happen." He had laughed at her intensity, and yet she had been right. Jonathan clenched his jaw, staring out at the swirling snow. Whoever she was, she had saved his life. The train ride out of Boston was long and cold. Frost blurred the city lights as they faded into distance. Clara huddled in her seat, suitcase tucked to her knees, body trembling with exhaustion. Hunger churned her stomach, but she could barely think of food. Outside, cityscape gave way to frozen fields and woods. Snow thickened, blanketing the world in silence. For Clara, quiet was both comfort and curse. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face twisted in contempt, or the twisted metal of the crash she had foreseen. When the train screeched to a halt at the rural station, Clara was one of few passengers to step off. The platform was nearly deserted, lit only by a flickering lamp and muffled by snow. She pulled her scarf tighter and began toward the town where her grandmother's old house stood. The road was barely visible beneath the drifts. Boots sank deep into the snow, wind stinging her face. Halfway to the outskirts, she spotted a figure slumped against a snowbank. At first, she thought it was a pile of coats or discarded trash, but as she drew closer, she recognized him. Daniel Brooks, her childhood neighbor. Once a bright, reckless boy, now a man who never seemed to escape the bottle. His lips were blue, skin ashen, the reek of alcohol sharp in the frozen air. "Daniel, you can't stay here," Clara said, panic rising. "You'll freeze to death." With what strength she had left, she pulled him up, slinging his arm over her shoulder. He was heavier than she remembered, body limp with intoxication. They stumbled together, Clara's boots sliding on the icy road. The Brooks house was only a block away. She pounded on the door until his sister answered, pale with shock. Together they got him inside, laid on the couch near the fireplace. "You saved him," his sister whispered, tears in her eyes. Clara shook her head, brushing snow from her coat. "Just keep him warm. He won't survive another night out there." She didn't wait for thanks. She retrieved her suitcase and continued toward her grandmother's house. Finally, the familiar lane came into view. Her chest tightened. The little white cottage hunched under the snow, shutters crooked, roof sagging from years of neglect. No light shone from the windows. She pushed open the gate, its hinges squealing. The porch creaked beneath her boots. Trembling, she fitted the key into the lock. The door swung open to darkness and stale air. Inside, the house smelled of dust and time. Furniture remained as her grandmother left it, covered with sheets and cobwebs. The air was icy, colder than outside, seeping into her bones. Clara set her suitcase down and sank onto the nearest chair, body quaking. She tried to light the old stove, but matches slipped from her numb fingers. Breath came shallow, head swimming. By the time a small fire flickered to life, her vision blurred. Sweat beaded her forehead despite the cold. Her legs trembled as she tried to stand, giving out beneath her. She collapsed onto the couch, pulling a tattered blanket over herself. Her body shivered violently, then went still as exhaustion claimed her. The storm howled outside, rattling windows and piling snow against the door. In the shadows of her grandmother's abandoned home, Clara lay trembling, skin clammy, breathing shallow. Alone, far from help, her strength slipping, her last thought before darkness overtook her was her grandmother's voice, steady and strong. "You're Bennett, Clara, you don't give up." But the fever was stronger than her. Will, and soon everything dissolved into silence. Jonathan Mercer had barely slept since the night of the accident. The news replayed in his mind over and over. Andrew, killed in the crash of the car Jonathan had been meant to drive. If it hadn't been for that woman, the one with the haunted eyes who had warned him, he would have been the one inside that twisted wreck. He couldn't shake her voice. "Please don't drive tonight. Something bad will happen." He had dismissed it at the time, yet now the words echoed in his thoughts like a distant tolling bell. Jonathan tried to throw himself into work, meetings, contracts, but nothing mattered. The thought of her lingered. Who is she? Why had she been so certain? Where did she go? He wondered aloud. He retraced the street where they had collided. A security guard remembered a pale young woman hauling a suitcase toward the northbound trains. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. Days later, on a business errand near the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border, he found himself following that thread, drawn by something he couldn't explain. Soon he stood in front of a small cottage. Roof heavy with snow, windows dark. Jonathan knocked. No answer. He pushed the door open. Hinges groaned. Inside, the air was stale and frigid. And then he saw her. Clara lay curled on a faded couch, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Her skin was pale, glistening with fever sweat. Lips cracked, breathing shallow. Jonathan's chest tightened at the sight. "God," he muttered, rushing forward. He knelt beside her, hand on her forehead. Heat burned against his palm. She stirred faintly, whispering words he couldn't make out. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than expected, fragile like porcelain. Bracing against the wind, he carried her to his car. The storm battered them with cruel force. He laid her gently across the back seat and drove as fast as the icy roads would allow toward Boston. By the time he reached the hospital, she was barely conscious. Nurses rushed her onto a gurney, questions flying. Name, relation, insurance. "I'll cover everything," Jonathan said firmly, pulling out his wallet. "Private room, full care, whatever she needs." The staff exchanged glances but didn't argue. His tone carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Hours blurred into one another as Jonathan paced the corridor outside the ward. Finally, a doctor approached. "She's stable now. Severe hypothermia compounded by infection. She'll need time, but she's young and strong. She should recover." Relief washed over him stronger than he expected. He nodded, unable to speak. When Clara opened her eyes again, she lay in a warm hospital bed. Crisp sheets, IV drips humming softly. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then she saw him. Jonathan sat beside her bed, coat draped over the armrest, fatigue etched into his face. But his eyes? For the first time, she saw something different. Not skepticism, but gratitude. "You're awake," he said softly, almost afraid to disturb her. Clara's throat was dry. "Why are you here?" "Because you saved my life," he replied, steady, grounding. "And I couldn't let you fade away in some forgotten house." Her lips trembled. She remembered the collision, the vision, her desperate warning. "The accident. It happened, didn't it?" Jonathan nodded slowly. "It wasn't me. I gave the car to a friend. He's gone. But it should have been me. You were right, and because of you, I'm alive." Clara closed her eyes briefly, a wave of emotion crashing over her. "I didn't mean for anyone else." "I know." He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. His touch was steady, grounding. "But you were the only one who saw it. I don't know how, and maybe I don't need to. What matters is that you saved me." A nurse entered quietly, checking Clara's vitals. She glanced at Jonathan and smiled faintly. "Your husband's been very devoted," she remarked, scribbling on the chart. Clara flushed, too weak to correct her. Jonathan said nothing, but his grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly. When the nurse left, silence settled over the room, warm and heavy. In it, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, yes, but more than that. An inexplicable bond, forged in the crucible of crisis. Clara, despite the fever still clinging to her body, felt the smallest flicker of safety. For days, Jonathan stayed near her, making calls from the hospital, bringing meals, ensuring every need was met. Clara tried to protest, insisting he didn't owe her anything. But he silenced her gently. "I owe you everything." And though her body remained weak, her heart stirred with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not despair, not fear, but the faintest glimmer of hope. By the time Clara was discharged from the hospital, a new chapter awaited her. Nearly 2 weeks had passed. The fever had broken, but her body was still fragile. She moved slowly, each step measured, her strength not yet fully returned. Jonathan insisted on driving her back, though she had no clear answer when he asked where she planned to stay. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I'll manage. Maybe the cottage again. It's all I have." Jonathan shook his head firmly as he steered through Boston's busy streets. "That's not acceptable. That house is unfit for anyone to live in, especially while you're recovering. You need warmth, stability, care." She started to protest, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. "I have a place. There's room, more than enough. Come stay at my home until you're well. It's not charity, Clara. Consider it repayment for saving my life." Her throat tightened at the conviction in his voice. There was no hint of pity, only resolve. "Jonathan," she began cautiously. "I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't," he said simply. "Besides, there's something else I want to discuss with you." A few days later, when she had regained enough strength to sit upright without exhaustion, he invited her to lunch in his study. The space was lined with shelves of leather-bound books and dominated by a wide desk befitting a man who handled large affairs. Clara felt out of place at first, but Jonathan's presence was steady. He poured her tea, then leaned forward. I want you to work with me. I'm launching a new division within my company, publishing, to be precise. I've read your files, your background. You know this world better than anyone I've interviewed. You have insight, intuition. What happened at your old firm? It was their loss, Clara muttered, still surprised. I'd be honored if you join me, he said. Not just a job, I want you as my assistant on this project. Someone I can trust. Her pulse quickened. After everything she had lost, her home, her career, her dignity, this offer felt like a lifeline. Still, doubts lingered. Why me? You hardly know me. Jonathan's gaze was steady. Because when everything else is noise, you speak the truth. You warned me and I lived. You have a clarity most people don't. I need someone like that beside me. Clara's eyes stung, emotion welling up. She nodded slowly. All right, I'll do it. His expression softened, relief flickering across his face. Good, then it's settled. And until you're fully recovered, you'll stay at my house. It'll be easier to coordinate everything, she agreed, though uncertainty tugged at her as the car pulled through the wrought iron gates of Jonathan's estate later that afternoon. The Mercer home was a sprawling stone mansion on the outskirts of the city, its manicured lawns now buried beneath winter snow. It was a world far removed from the drafty cottage where she had nearly died. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and faint lavender. Staff greeted Jonathan with respect and Clara with polite curiosity. He showed her to a guest room on the second floor, large, warm, with windows overlooking snow-covered gardens. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Perhaps here, at least for a while, she could heal. But that fragile sense of safety shattered the next evening. Clara had just finished reviewing preliminary files Jonathan had given her when laughter echoed through the grand hall. A woman's laughter, sharp, confident, familiar. When Clara stepped into the parlor, she froze. Standing beside Jonathan was a tall, striking, red-haired woman, her arm casually linked with his. Dressed elegantly, her polished smile didn't reach her eyes. Clara recognized her instantly, the woman who had been in Richard's bed. Jonathan noticed her hesitation and gestured. Clara, this is Isabella Cross, my fiancée. The words hit her like a physical blow. Fiancé, of course. A man like Jonathan wouldn't be without someone at his side. But fate had dealt a cruel hand. Isabella's smile widened when she saw Clara. So, you're the assistant Jonathan's been talking about, she said smoothly, voice dripping with false sweetness. How quaint, Clara's heart pounded. Memories of betrayal, Richard's face, Isabella's laughter crashed together. She forced her lips into a tight line, but inside the ground seemed to crumble beneath her. The safety she had begun to feel had twisted into another battlefield. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. From the moment Isabella realized who Clara was, who had seen her in Richard's bed, there was no disguising the contempt in her eyes. In front of the household staff, Isabella wielded cruelty like a blade. You missed a page, Isabella sneered one afternoon, sweeping into the study where Clara was compiling research for Jonathan's publishing project. She plucked a folder from Clara's hands and tossed it carelessly onto the desk. For someone with such a prestigious background, you make simple mistakes, Isabella said loudly enough for the nearby maid to hear. Clara's face flushed, but she kept her tone even. I was going to add the final section once Jonathan approved the outline. Excuses, Isabella replied with a brittle laugh. She turned to the maid. Can you imagine trusting someone like this with serious work? Jonathan is far too kind, too charitable for his own good. Clara wanted to disappear, but Jonathan entered the room. He picked up the folder, flipped through the contents, and shot Isabella a pointed look. It's complete. Exactly what I asked for. Clara has an eye for detail that others lack. The room went still. Isabella's smile faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. If you say so, darling, she said, brushing past Clara with simmering fury. This became a pattern. Isabella's barbs came daily. Remarks about Clara's clothes, her background, even the fact that she lived under Jonathan's roof. Yet each time, Jonathan found subtle ways to counter her, praising Clara's work or ensuring she had the resources and respect she deserved. Despite the tension, Clara threw herself into the project. She worked late into the night, drafting proposals, analyzing manuscripts, organizing strategies. Jonathan often joined her, their conversations drifting from work to softer topics: music, literature, memories of childhood. During one evening, with papers spread across the mahogany desk, Jonathan finally spoke of his past. "My father never trusted me to make my own choices," he admitted, voice low, gaze distant. "He believes marriage is just another business transaction." With Isabella, he sees a merger of influence, wealth, and old family ties. Feelings are irrelevant to him. Clara listened quietly, pen in hand. "And what do you see?" she asked softly. Jonathan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "For years I told myself I could live with it. That duty and loyalty were enough. But after Andrew's death, after meeting you, I can't keep lying to myself. I want more than this arrangement." His eyes found hers, lingering a beat too long. Clara's breath caught. She looked away, heart pounding. She knew the danger of that look, the weight it carried. But she also knew she was no longer the woman who had allowed Richard to define her worth. Jonathan's gaze both terrified and studied her. Isabella, however, was not blind. She sensed the shift, the unspoken closeness growing between them. Her fury sharpened, her public humiliations more frequent. One morning, in front of the household staff, Isabella gestured at Clara's modest dress. "Our assistant seems to think she's at home here. Perhaps she forgets she's still just a guest." "A charity case," Clara stiffened, words choking in her throat. But Jonathan's voice cut through the air, firm and clear. "Enough, Isabella. Clara is not a charity case. She is the reason my current project is moving forward at all. If you cannot show her respect, you insult me as well." The staff exchanged startled glances. Clara felt something else, a flicker of safety, of being seen. Later that evening, Jonathan found her in the library, curled in an armchair, a book in her hands. Forgotten in her lap, the book remained closed. Jonathan sat quietly across from her. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You shouldn't have to apologize," Clara replied. "You've already done more for me than I could ever repay." He leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. "I don't protect you out of obligation, Clara. I do it because you deserve it. Because you've shown me a truth I cannot ignore." Her heart tightened, both warmed and unsettled. She nodded, unable to find words, feeling the weight of his gaze linger long after he left the room. And though the storm between Isabella and Jonathan grew fiercer each day, Clara sensed something deeper, stronger, and far more dangerous was taking root. An unspoken bond no insult or scheme could undo. Winter's grip on Boston had not softened. But inside the Mercer estate, the temperature came from a different storm. Isabella's hostility toward Clara had grown so blatant that even the staff whispered about it behind closed doors. Every meal, every gathering, every chance she had, Isabella reminded Clara that she was an outsider. One evening at dinner, Isabella raised her glass, her smile razor-sharp. To Jonathan for tolerating distractions in his home. Not everyone would be so patient. Her gaze slid toward Clara like a blade. The butler stiffened. The maid froze mid-step. No one dared speak. Jonathan set his fork down deliberately. His voice, calm but final, cut through the tension. "Enough, Isabella. I will not allow you to humiliate Clara in this house again." The table fell silent. Isabella's eyes widened, her face coloring. "You're defending her. In front of me?" "Yes," Jonathan said evenly. "Because she deserves respect. Something you seem incapable of showing." The words cut deeper than any private rebuke. For the first time, Jonathan did not shield Clara quietly. He declared his stance openly before witnesses. Isabella's lips trembled with rage. The confrontation did not stop there. Days later, Jonathan's father summoned him to the family office in downtown Boston. The man's presence was as imposing as ever, filling the room behind a gleaming oak desk. "I hear troubling things," his father said, voice cold. "You humiliate Isabella. You elevate that assistant. Do you understand the damage you're doing? Jonathan did not flinch. I understand perfectly, and I no longer care to play your game of arranged futures. Isabella may serve your ambitions, father, but she does not serve mine. The older man's jaw tightened. You are reckless. This woman, Clara, what is she to you? A fling? An act of rebellion? She is the only person who has ever spoken truth to me, Jonathan said, unwavering. The only one who saw me as more than a pawn in your schemes. That is what she is. The office fell into heavy silence. His father's fury was evident, but Jonathan did not back down. Meanwhile, Clara continued her work on the publishing project. Despite the tension in the household, she produced results that impressed everyone, except Isabella. She organized a complex launch schedule, negotiated with authors, and streamlined the editorial team with precision. Even skeptics began to see her value. One afternoon, Jonathan reviewed her latest proposal in front of executives. This, he said, holding up the neatly bound packet, is why Clara Bennett is indispensable to this company. Her ideas will shape our future. The executives nodded in agreement. Clara's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but quiet pride. For once, she was recognized for her mind, not dismissed as an accessory to a man's ambition. But the true test came when Isabella attempted her final blow. She stormed into the boardroom during a meeting, eyes blazing, and slammed a stack of papers onto the table. She doesn't belong here. This is a mockery of everything you've built, Jonathan. If you continue this farce, you'll regret it. Jonathan rose slowly, gaze steady. No, Isabella. The only mockery here is the pretense of our engagement. It ends now. Whatever arrangement our families made, I am breaking it. You no longer have power here. Gasps rippled through the room. Isabella's face contorted with fury, but Jonathan's voice carried finality. Clara has proven her worth through talent, dedication, and honesty. You, Isabella, have proven only cruelty and arrogance. I will not tie my life to someone who thrives on destroying others. She stormed out, her heels striking the marble like thunder. Word spread quickly through Boston's circles. Jonathan Mercer had ended his engagement, defied his father, and stood openly beside the woman who had once been invisible. That night, Clara stood by the tall windows of the library, snow drifting beyond the glass. Jonathan joined her quietly, steady at her side. Neither spoke at first. The silence was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. Finally, Jonathan said softly, the future is uncertain. There will be battles ahead, but I don't regret a single step. Clara turned to him, heart steady for the first time in months. She had lost everything once, her home, her career, her dignity. Yet here she was, rebuilding, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Outside, the snow fell endlessly, covering the scars of the past. Inside, two lives, once broken in different ways, looked forward together. Somewhere across the city, Richard Hale and Isabella Cross faced the ruins of their own making. Isolated, stripped of the control they once wielded so easily. For Clara and Jonathan, it was not an ending, but the beginning of something unspoken, fragile, and real.